Morning, everyone. Thank you for joining us for the Meat Processor Grant webinar. My name is Jeff Swenson, and I serve as DATCP's Livestock and Meat Specialist. And before we get started, just a couple of things to cover and some housekeeping on how we'll proceed today. Please make sure you're muted throughout the presentation. You can do this by clicking on the small microphone in the left-hand corner of your screen, or mute your phone if you've joined us by cell phone or landline today. If you have a question during the presentation, please put it in the chat and we will get to the questions just as soon as we can. And there will be a question and answer segment at the end of this presentation. And at that time, you'll be able to place questions in the chat as well. You can unmute yourself and ask your question. The meeting will be recorded and will be posted on the Meat and Livestock webpage within the DATCP website and DATCP's YouTube this afternoon. Please feel free to refer back to the recording between now and then and the grant application deadline. So we will go through where to find that and where the grant application information is on the website as well. So as we get started, I just want to say that this meat processor infrastructure grant program was proposed in Governor Evers' budget at a dollar amount of $1 million per year, and that was to be green lighted until for multi-years until the legislature decided to stop it. And it didn't pass as it was, and the Joint Finance Committee and the rest of the legislature approved $200,000 per year for the next 2 years, so basically the next biennium. So that's where we're at right now, and we can get started. I have Morgan Cavett, one of our public information officers, with us, and she will be running the slides today. So I will walk through this and show everyone where the application and request for proposals is when we're done with the slide presentation. But if you do go to the DATCP website under Agricultural Development, and then go to Economic Development and Innovation Center, and then there will be a Meat and Livestock Development page where all this information is housed. Go ahead, Morgan. So the grant overview, basically this grant is to grow Wisconsin's meat industry and improve the long-term viability of the livestock sector through meat processing establishments. It's available to new and existing processors to facilitate changes and expansion to grow harvest capacity and or increase product throughput. So one question that we often get asked is does a facility need to harvest livestock in order to qualify for this grant? And the answer is no. So we would strive for increased product throughput for further processors, and we would want some sort of documentation or some sort of proof that increased product throughput would increase harvest capacity further back in the chain. Go ahead, Morgan. So the funds will be distributed through a competitive review process. So there will be a panel of reviewers. There will be DATCP employees and external reviewers. And the grant maximum is $50,000, and the grant project is to be 2 years in duration or less. And we can talk a little bit more about that as well. One caveat here is that there would need to be a match. So it would need to be at least a $100,000 project if you're going to apply for $50,000. And the meat processor, the successful applicant, would need to match at least $50,000. And those matching funds expensed during the project must be documented in the same manner as proof of reimbursable grant expenses. And I think we can go to the next slide, Morgan. So those grant expenses would need to fall in that 2-year period, and we'll walk through the timeline a little bit. And this is a reimbursable grant. So paid invoices would be presented to the Department of Agriculture, Trade and Consumer Protection, and then you'd be reimbursed for those expenses up to $50,000. The applications are due on January 14th. We'll walk through that application, the actual application. It's not very complex. We do want detail, but we wanted to make it a simple, easy to read, easy to complete grant application. And as I said, we'll walk through that in just a little bit. Applications will be scored and winners will be selected beginning by January 28th, and applicants will be notified on February 4th. And once those applicants, successful applicants, are notified, approval letters would be sent in February 11th, and contracts would be executed during March. Again, when we talk about the project scope or the timeline, no expenses would be able to be reimbursed before April 1st, 2022, or the completion of the contract. And we'll talk a little bit about that contract later in the presentation, and projects would need to be concluded no later than April 1st of 2024. So eligible applicants must or will operate a DATCP inspected, so state inspected or federally inspected licensed meat processing facility. They must be engaged in livestock harvest or further processing. And further processing is pretty wide in scope. It could be sausage, cured meats, other value-added meat manufacturer. They must be located in Wisconsin, of course, and the project must increase harvest capacity or the amount of meat products moved through the system in that particular facility. Eligible applicants must be in good standing with whoever is inspecting them, whether that be state inspected by the Department of Agriculture here in the state or the USDA. A check will be done to make sure that they're in good standing with financial institutions and the USDA FSIS, as I mentioned. Eligible applicants can't have outstanding state or federal penalties or violations, and no employees of DATCP or our immediate family here at the department are eligible to apply. And you wouldn't be able to have another grant application or grant in progress with the Department of Agriculture. So this grant program is really designed to provide access and services and resources for proposed meat processing establishment projects that grow or develop the current business harvest or throughput capacity, should improve production or profitability, and help the processor answer capacity and or production bottlenecks and challenges. One thing, I'll take a time out here and say that we are finding that bottleneck in production can happen at various different points in the processing. So a processor talked to us early on about packaging and said that that's really the bottleneck, and they could harvest more animals if they could basically get that meat packaged quicker. And so equipment, we'll get into, equipment is able to be reimbursed through this grant program, and maybe that packaging equipment is really what would need to happen in order to overcome that bottleneck. So thinking outside of typical harvest floor and meat cutting and manufacturer is welcomed under this grant. So projects could include multiple aspects from the following areas, and we won't spend a lot of time on this, but expansion efforts to provide assistance with professional services, and that could be those things could be siting, engineering, design, layout of new facilities or production lines. So an existing meat establishment that wants to redo their production flow. And would hire consultants to do that and buy equipment to make that happen, that would be welcomed under this grant. Any project that can be shown to increase an establishment's harvest capacity by 20% or more per year. When we developed the proposal for this budget item, we had a stakeholder group of meat processors that met, and they were pretty adamant that if a meat establishment was going to increase harvest capacity, if that was the project that they wanted to cover under this grant, that we should hold them to at least 20% capacity increase per year. and any project that can be proven to increase meat or meat product production that shows a benefit to harvest capacity within the supply chain would be welcome to apply as well. Eligible expenses, I will say that equipment is allowed in this particular grant program. That's not very common for grants that the Department of Agriculture, Trade and Consumer Protection would normally administer. But because of the $50,000 cap to projects, equipment was allowed to be able to be reimbursed. Other eligible expenses would be engineering, architectural design, construction, and food safety advisory services.
And Jeff, we have a question in the chat from Charlie Walker. He says, can one order the equipment today due to lead times and then complete payment of the equipment after April 1st if awarded this grant?
That is a question. I know that we have Ryan Dunn, our grant specialist, on the line as well from DATCP. Ryan, I know that question has been posed to you a couple of times. Do you have input on that?
Right. No, that's a good question. And it'd be one thing to order the equipment. At the end of the day, what is submitted to us is what we're going to go off of. So any invoice dates need to be after 4/1/22 or when the contract is fully signed by both DATCP and the grantee. So if the equipment is ordered, you know, it's kind of incumbent upon the vendor to make sure the invoice is dated properly.
Charlie, I hope that answered your question. So it's not necessarily, according to Ryan, when that equipment would be ordered, but when the invoice would be dated. And that date would have to be post signing and completing the contract with the Department of Agriculture. There's a long list of ineligible expenses. I won't spend a lot of time on this. Again, it is in the request for proposal document that is on the Department of Agriculture's website. But real estate purchases, repayment of loans or mortgages, rent and contract payments for time periods extending beyond the term of the grant. We had a question about that just now. And administrative or overhead costs. Not direct costs of the grant program would be ineligible. Advertising, legal fees, and lobbying would not be covered under this grant. Application process. The application form is located at the Department of Agriculture's website. There's a link here on the PowerPoint presentation, and applications must be mailed to Ryan Dunn. His address is there. It's also on the request for proposal on the website, and we'll get to that in just a minute. And if you don't have computer access, you can download and complete that application and mail them in. And we already have some applications that have been mailed in. So the proposal review criteria, it's a competitive grant. So there's, because you apply, you'd be judged against other grant applications. So there is not a guarantee that you would be funded. And each application would be reviewed by a committee that we mentioned already, and it would receive a rating based on the scoring criteria. We will spend some time on going over that scoring criteria. And preferences may be given to proposals that demonstrate an industry-wide benefit, increased animal harvest benefiting multiple Wisconsin producers or farmers, and DATCP may require additional information or do a site visit during the proposal and review process.
Jeff, we have another question in the chat from Michael. So did you say that the total amount of the grant money is $1 million? At awards of $50,000, this only allows for a total of 20 awards. Is this correct?
I even wish that was the case, Michael. So the initial budget ask was $1 million. Only $200,000 per year for 2 years was budgeted by the Joint Finance Committee and the legislature. So it's even fewer grants possible than that. The minimum grant request would be $10,000. The maximum would be $50,000. And we only have $200,000 to work with overall. The one thing that I will say, Michael, is that one of our goals is to make sure that we get a lot of great grant applications in to prove that there's a need for further investment in the meat sector in Wisconsin. So that'll be very important to make sure that we are showing a need for future funding at higher levels. We don't need to spend a lot of time going over the contract, but DATCP will develop a contract. No funding commitment is final until that contract is returned. Grant contracts, this is the important part, must be returned within 30 days of receipt. So once we generate that contract and mail it to you, the successful applicant would have 30 days to return that grant contract and start executing or start with the project. I think we can go to the next slide. It's a reimbursable grant. I touched on that. So the successful applicants would turn in their paid invoices and be reimbursed up to $50,000. And an amount of 25% of the grant would be held until the final final report on that grant project would be submitted to DATCP. Go
Jeff,
ahead.
We have another question in the chat here from Shar. Is this grant for a new place and being built in the next 2 months because we want to be efficient?
So the timing of the grant would be from the time that contract is executed. So early to late spring 2022 until 2024. So if a project is underway already, the only expenses that could be included in this grant proposal would be expenses that would happen after the grant contract is executed. So if a project is going on right now, yes, you're eligible to apply, and we welcome you to do that. We want you to apply for that, but we would not be able to reimburse expenses that would be incurred prior to the execution of the contract. Reporting requirements, we wanted to make this fairly easy and not a heavy burden for the successful applicants. So we are only going to require 2 grant reports per year until the end of that. So the most that we would expect would be 4 in a final grant project. And we just want to know the project status, what steps have been completed in the last 6 months, actions to be completed in the next 6 months, and any barriers or issues with the project that is slowing down the grant or challenges that you're having that we may be able to assist with here at DATCP. And we do reserve the right to modify reporting requirements during the course of the project, depending on how that grant project is going as it's underway. Final report will be required, and it's just a brief description of the project intent, summary of accomplishments, outcomes, including the percentage of harvest capacity increased or increased throughput in pounds, additional animals harvested, processed, efficiencies gained through the improvements made or the expansions made through this grant, and other insights from the project execution that may be helpful to other meat establishments that are hoping to expand their processing capacity. Morgan, did we have another question? I saw one pop up and
Yes, we do. It just came up. So is the project pre-approved prior to my execution, or do I have risk that the invoice may be rejected upon submission?
Ryan, be ready if I don't answer this question completely, but invoices would not be rejected unless it falls out of the project proposal, or it would be an ineligible expense. So before you spend that money, you want to be talking with us at the Department of Agriculture to make sure that it is something that could be covered. We went over some of those eligible expenses as far as engineering and equipment and equipment installation and those things. So you want to double check with that, but it would be very uncommon, if at all, that an invoice for an approved expense would be rejected. I'm getting a head nod from Ryan.
Yeah, that's spot on, Jeff. As long as it falls within what the project is for, what the grant award is for, and the proper date, there's a high chance that your invoices aren't going to be rejected, I would say.
And I would even say that if the project scope changes and you need to do something different than that initial proposal, err on the side of caution and reach out to us ahead of time, so that we know. That's not uncommon with grants, that you head down, you write a proposal, you head down one avenue and find out that maybe that won't work and we need to amend that grant. Reach out to us to make sure that we can still reimburse you for those expenses that maybe weren't covered under the initial proposal. I won't spend much time on the record requirements. I want to make sure that we have additional time for questions, but you would want to make sure that you're keeping records of correspondence with the Department of Agriculture, Trade and Consumer Protection as it relates to this grant and the activities. Receipts and invoices we want you to keep so that we would be able to pay off of originals or copies of originals, and reports and documents are something that you'd want to file as well. Grantees shall retain all data and other records relating to the acquisition and performance of the grant award agreement for a period of 4 years after the completion of the contract. We want to track to find out how well this money worked for the industry and the meat sector as a whole. So we do want to follow up even after the 2-year project is completed to make sure that future funding is used correctly and on projects that work. It's not necessarily a checkup to see how well this is working for you. We want to know what works well and what maybe could be improved upon in the future. All records will be subjected to inspection and audit by state personnel. We went over that a little bit with Ryan on that question about eligible expenses not being rejected when that invoice is sent in. And the last thing I will say, just as a caveat, is that we are subject to open records request and the Freedom of Information Act here at the Department of Agriculture. If you are a successful grant applicant and begin a project with us and execute that contract, the name of your business will likely be put into a press release. We'll use that information to promote this grant program. And anyone that wants information about how that money was used would be able to request that. All right, we'll take a break here for some questions, and then I will start sharing my screen, and we'll get right into the grant application, where to find it, and what that application looks like, and scoring criteria. And again, you can put those questions in a chat box or unmute at this time if you want to ask the question directly. Morgan, I'm not seeing any questions come up at this point in time, so I'm going to move right into sharing my screen if that's okay with you. And again, keep asking those questions in the chat box as we go, like you have been. So that's working very well.
Jeff, we did just have a question come in from Heather.
Perfect.
As a matching grant, how is that handled?
As a matching grant, that's a great question, and I didn't do a very good job of covering that. So we know, first of all, if you're applying for $50,000, there would need to be an outlay by the meat processor of $50,000 themselves. So basically a $100,000 project, half of it would be reimbursed. We know in some of the correspondence and conversations that we're having is that these are hundreds of thousands of dollars projects. Oftentimes it is capped at $50,000. So let's say that you're doing some improvements to a harvest floor or purchasing equipment that would cost $300,000. That's okay. The grant can only reimburse you for $50,000 of that. So it's not just $50,000 for one piece of small equipment and being reimbursed by that. The successful applicants will need to prove that they're spending at least $50,000 of their own money.
No other questions right now, Jeff. So I think you're free to move forward.
All right. I'm not always the greatest at sharing my screen, so I don't know exactly what you're seeing right now.
Right now we can see your file. Yeah. Okay. Now you're on the website now.
All right. So I just went through our internal website to get there. But if you go to the Wisconsin Department of Agriculture Trade and Consumer Protection website and Googling DATCP works, that'll get you there. You'll see the home screen that looks like this. The grant information is under Agriculture Development. You're going to want to go to Economic Development and Innovation Center. And then there is a page called Meat and Livestock. And there's different information about economic development, other resources for you, links to the Wisconsin Beef Council and other organizations in the state. But the meat processor grant information, by and large, is front and center on that page right now. A lot of the information that I covered is right here in this request for proposals, and there's even more detailed information. So feel free to look at that at your leisure. And we're going to scroll down. I hope I'm not making anybody motion sick, but the application scoring criteria is also listed in the RFP. So basically, we want as much detail as possible, even though the grant application that we'll get to in a moment is relatively simple and organization and thought out, explained in a way that makes sense and sounds like it can be carried out successfully, will weigh into the decision. Statement of need. Again, we get questions every time that I touch on this. You do not need to be a harvest facility in order to apply for these grants. Everybody is welcome to, but here is where you would we would score you on whether or not that increased harvest capacity is increased by 20%. Meat processing throughput, the product would increase throughout this project or by the completion of this project. That's where we would score this. Increased efficiency, improved competition within the Wisconsin meat sector, and creates employees. Not every project needs to do that, and I apologize for not every project necessarily needs to hit every single one of those bullets, but these are the things that will be viewed more favorable in the grant applications.
Hey, Jeff,
Yeah.
we have a question in the chat.
Awesome.
So does hours worked by employees count as matching dollars that can be reimbursed? Example, consulting.
Consulting does qualify for match. Salaries of employees, Ryan, would not, correct?
That could work as long as the work being done is in relation to the project.
There's your answer on that. So work involved in this project or the expansion or change would be able to be used for match. But any consulting services that you're employing could also be considered match. So this is basically the highest. There's 35 points possible. That's the heaviest weighted area as far as the evaluation criteria. Activities and outcomes, we want to make sure that the project makes sense. the activities fit the project's purpose, and we want to be sure when we review these grants that the grant meets the need of the purpose, so that increased throughput or increased harvest capacity. And then we would want some measurables as far as how these changes in the establishment actually increases that overall capacity, whether it be harvest or processing capacity. And we want to make sure that that's realistic, and the changes that are being made or the improvements that are being made can live up to what we're measuring or what the proposal says. And then the budget, we do need budgets. One thing that gets asked is the question that often gets asked while people are reviewing this information or processors are thinking of applying is whether or not whether or not you would need an actual estimate from a consulting firm or a construction firm or equipment facility. The answer is no. We want to make this budget just as accurate as possible, but we're not necessarily looking for actual estimates or quotes down to the last penny. And then the extra points, how much industry-wide benefit does this project provide? So how does it not only improve the plant, how does it improve the landscape for meat processing and the livestock sector in your community, region, and across the entire state? Sometimes I have trouble with, let's see if I have. Are you seeing the grant application right now, Morgan?
Yes, we are.
Oh, awesome. Usually that the grant application is really straightforward, and I want to stress that we really wanted to make this as simple as possible, easy to complete as possible without it being really a heavy lift. However, we do expect as much information as you can provide us in order to be competitive in this grant. So we do want to know the amount that you're requesting, and again, that grant amount ranges from $10,000 to $15,000. The project focus, current business harvest capacity, production improvement, resolve capacity production challenges, or other meat processing development. And then really there is only 2 questions involved in this grant application process. And again, we wanted to make this simple, but it's kind of up to the applicant to make sure that there's detail in there. So we want to know what your project is. We want to include the project, why the project is important, not only to your facility, but how it can improve the region and competitiveness of the state, and what you'll be doing, what processes will take place, results and changes that will happen as a result of this investment. Project objective, simply check those that apply. And project potential impact, this is where we want to know what throughput increases would be, harvest capacity would be, any benefit to the region that you're in. So, and then the work plan. So basically a timeline on how you would execute this and what the timeline looks like, again, during that 2-year project timeline. And then of course we wanted to make this budget process as simple as possible too. Again, salary, Ryan answered that question, that salary can be included in this. Services and subcontractors, food safety, advisory service costs, equipment, supplies and materials, and miscellaneous. And again, we are here at the Department of Agriculture. Ryan's contact information is right on the website. I'll be as helpful as I can be if you contact me directly to walk you through this application process in the next basically 1 month, 3-week period.
And Jeff, we've got several questions in the chat. So I will start with the first one here from Heather. As a startup, we're currently acquiring a facility to use for custom exempt. So we don't currently have any throughput. How would you want us to show increased capacity or increased access to local farms? We will not have a slaughter floor and focus on using MSUs.
We would, there's a couple of different ways, and I hesitated before I asked because I wanted to think through this. So Heather, one way that your grant application may read and may be viewed most competitively is looking at the area that you're going to be operating in, what's available right now, and making sure that this increases meat processing or in that area. So that would be the increase. We want to make sure that as a whole, we're servicing regions and giving more opportunities to livestock producers in that state in that area to get animals processed and meat products made. I hope that answered your question, Heather.
All right, and the next one is from Jennifer. How can you find out your impact in the community compared to other meat processing plants? Region and state, how important statistics are for my plant?
Hi, Jennifer. Thanks for joining us. So we're not going to necessarily be concerned on how your establishment measures against others. We want to make sure that if you're going to increase harvest capacity, it's more a measure of how many more farmers or how many more head of livestock you can move through that system. So we're really concentrating on those statistics, those measures within your own facility. I did mention regional impacts and things like that. The regional impact would be harvesting more livestock or processing more meat and benefiting that area that you operate in.
And Jeff, this is an add-on to the question. Michael, I will get back to you, but Jennifer also asked, what is considered an area? I am surrounded by many small towns.
The area that you're servicing right now, Jennifer, so the communities that do business with you right now, that area where you're getting livestock from that you're processing. So we're in that case, we would really be wanting to look at increasing harvest capacity or throughput to benefit that community. So.
All right, and then Michael has a question. If I have a project with an estimated cost of $50,000, but the remaining grant funds are exhausted, can I get a partial award?
Ryan, I'm hoping that you can.
I was a little confused by that. I saw that in the grant. Yeah, we would consider partial awards, but if we've got $200,000 to grant out, and we're going to give those to the best of the grant applications. If that helps, great. If not, just if you want to clarify, that'd be fine too.
Yeah, if you can follow up with the question, just to make sure that we're clear and answering correctly and giving you the information you need, that would be great.
All right, a couple other things in the chat. Heidi made a comment in here saying MSU operators are telling us that they could harvest more if they could get the carcasses processed. The bottleneck for them is access to processing. So just a comment on that one. And then Jennifer has a question in here as well that says, should I use the 2019 year and compare it to 2021? I believe she's referring back to showing that increase in capacity.
That's a good question, and I'm going to give you a very definite answer and say that's a little bit up to you. I understand that historical data, taking 2020 out, 2020 and 2021 out because of what COVID has done to our small processors may be beneficial to you, but averaging several years would be the most appropriate.
All right, Jeff, that is all of the questions in the chat for now. So.
Okay. We are available to help and answer any questions that you have. I know Heather, Jennifer, you've asked several questions. Michael, if you have any follow-up, just feel free to contact us and we will drill down further on the questions that you had if need be.
And Jeff, we did have another question come in from Charlie. So what is the expected average grant award to be per application? Are you leaning to more awards versus legacy awards?
We don't know and may not be able to answer that question until we see those grant applications. Knowing the costs associated with equipment and facility improvements, those grants there may be fewer grants at the larger dollar amount. I can't say that for sure until we see more grant applications come in and what processors are asking. But honestly, that may be a fewer grant, larger dollar amount, maybe the trend.
Okay, and then Jennifer put in the chat as well. I'm sorry, please give me the direct phone number. I came on late into the Zoom meeting.
Direct phone number to me would be 608-333-7016. Ryan Dunn's contact information is on our website. Basically, it's listed a couple of places in the RFP and on that website, so you can look up Ryan's information there. I don't know that my direct line is there. And then jeffrey.swenson@wisconsin.gov is my email address, and that would be Jeffrey REY and Swenson SON, if that helps. But yeah, feel free to reach out.
All right, and we've got another question from Raul. I think that's how you pronounce your name. I'm sorry if it's not. Oh, here's your question. So is there a preference for the type of ownership of the business applying for the grant? Example, family owned, private, equity owned, public, etc.
No. Thank you for that question. So all of those would be able to apply. The one thing that we didn't cover is there is a maximum employees threshold. So it would need to be a facility of 500 employees or less. So some of the larger plants that we think of may be located in Kenosha, Green Bay, they are not eligible to apply. So we understand that that's a pretty high threshold for employees, but the ownership wouldn't make much difference as far as making that grant competitive.
All right, Jeff, no additional questions in the chat for now. Oh, as I say that, here comes one. So from Carrie, if we took over an existing business in the last year, can we use their historical data or only our own for the last 9 months?
That would be something, feel free to follow up with. And as I think through that, you could use historical data from the previous owners if you have access to that. What I'm thinking about as I'm thinking and talking at the same time is that if your business model has changed from the previous ownership, maybe that's a challenge that we need to visit with a little bit more, and you want to rely on your own limited data during the time that you've owned it. But both would be acceptable. Previous ownership statistics, figures, budgets, throughput, harvest numbers would be acceptable.
All right, nothing else in the chat for now, Jeff.
All right, feel free to reach out. This will be posted at that livestock and meat development page. Feel free to spread the word, have other people that may be interested watch that, other employees within your establishment that may be assisting in this grant application process can watch it at any time they want. So we'll make that available. I'm going to say by the end of today, although Morgan has made it known that she will beat that and try to have it out by about lunchtime today. And with that, thank you, everyone. Thank you for the great questions. Thank you for joining us today. It was a good group, and we hope that more people are able to watch this as it was recorded. And again, can't stress enough, feel free to reach out if you do have questions during your application process. Thank you, everyone.